they started. This was the original medium. Here you go. Okay? All right, so this was $18.98, and like I said, $50. The next one over here, this came up 4 years later. But look at this one. Look what he did here. A little portable. You could take this to school, to work, to church, any place where you needed music. I call this the original iPod. And just think, if you took this thing to a party and you had enough of those blue wax cylinders, you could be a DJ. All right, this is really easy to see how it works. So I'm going to show, I can demonstrate for you. But I can lift this part of it away, and this, here's the blue wax cylinder, the same as over there. And you ladies missed it, but this round circle here is called a diaphragm. The diaphragm vibrates with the sound of our voice. And underneath it is a little tiny needle. So when this thing vibrates, and it vibrates because it's sitting in the little grooves, and it vibrates that, it creates the sound which comes out this way. Converse to that, if you talk in here and had a blank one, the needle would put the markings on here. So it's both ways. So I'm going to play this. So I release the spring which makes this turn. I take, and all I have to do is put the needle down. Whatever the needle touches, everything is recorded. Whatever's underneath it, it will play. Big difference. Talk about moonlight, in there you find moonlight. You have your sweetheart by your side. You have no one see you. I know that. All right, I heard enough of that one. Okay, but it gives you an idea how the thing works, right? So this was 1902, and this you could have bought for $20. See, coming down. But look at this baby. This, which probably most of us have seen these in people's houses. This was $250. And if you had one of these, boy, you were doing well. But something else happened. This was 1906, but something else happened. Look, instead of the blue wax cylinder, we now had what we old people call a record. Right? I always kid the kids. I said, well, I think you kids call it a CD or something. They don't know what this is. And even the kids don't know what a CD is anymore. All right, but he did not invent this record format. It was invented by the Victor Talking Record Company, which later merged with RCA, became known as RCA Victor. And he didn't think this was great or anything. He thought that the fidelity was actually better, which it was, in that round cylinder. But he realized that waxed cylinder, you could go and break it real easy. Yeah. So he made this out of unbreakable material. And you can see how thick this is. We cut one just so you can see how thick that is. Right? It was very unbreakable. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to play this for you over here. But you have to understand the technology, basically, this diaphragm and a horn. Here's the diaphragm, and underneath there's the little needle. And just as I put the horn here and it got real loud, look what he did. He took the horn and he wrapped the horn around. The horn's on the inside of the box. See? But nice though, right? It's on the inside. So I'm going to play this for you. I'm going to put the needle down right about here. And he also added a volume control. Look inside. So that was the big advance of the year. Okay. So that's the phonograph.
Is that
what year was that?
This was 1902.
Oh no, the rotations per minute.
Was yeah, it was 80.
80.
It was 80.
Yeah.
Okay, so
yeah. He did it.
When did 78 then came later?
I don't really know the date, but he purposely made his different than everybody else's,
Okay.
so that you couldn't play this on that, that
Right.
on this. You know,
So
purposely.
these 80
It's
RPM.
80 RPM. Yeah.
That's 78.
Yeah. You could use it, but there's other differences too. The technology was his needle went up and down, the other ones went side to side. You know, there were little differences like that. Anyway, so that's the story here. So he was now, all this all happened up in West Orange at his second location. And up in West Orange, his house was there, and he had these little children, small children. And they were home playing with one of those flip books where, you know, you flip the pages of the book and you could, it looks like an animation is moving. And he saw that and he thought to himself, hey, I could make a motion picture camera to do the same thing. So he went into his laboratory and he builds this wooden box. And he puts a lens on the front of it to focus an image down on film. He puts a door on the side to close it with a big handle to move the film. Well, he had everything he needed, but he had no film for his camera. But he had a good friend by the name of George Eastman of Eastman Kodak. So he goes to see George and says, George, I need some of your film. Now, George had just invented the soft film, like negative film. Prior to George, all photography used to be done on glass plates. So George invents this new soft film. I need some of your film. He says, sure, I'll give you whatever you need. He says, it's 70 millimeters wide. Oh, he says, that's too big. Could you cut that in half for me and make it 35 millimeters? Have you heard 35 millimeter film? Well, that's where that came from. So he put the 35 millimeter film into his new camera. He closes the door. He starts to crank the handle. And all of a sudden, one of his men just sneezes right in front of him. And he caught it on film. He caught the first thing ever recorded on film. And thankfully, he had the forethought to immediately upload that to YouTube.
Yeah, right.
And if you go to YouTube, type in Thomas Edison, you will see the sneeze. The very first thing ever recorded, which is amazing. So anyway, so he started.
Everything is on YouTube.
And that is true. And it is really true. But so it was that started the whole industry of movie making. And so up in West Orange, he built himself a movie studio. He called it the Black Mariah. It's still there. You can go and see it. And what this was a building about the size of this. He put the building on a pivot and put wheels on the corners and a little track around it. And so inside was a stage where the actors would act. And over here, he opened the roof so that the sunshine would come in and bathe the stage with sunshine, with light. And so the actors could act and he would film, and all of a sudden, when they realized that the sun had moved, they would all go outside and they would move the building around on the wheels. And keep keep it in view of the lights. And so it's a very creative way, but he did a great job.
Yeah,
well,
spotlight.
And he did that for a while, and until he decided that he wanted to go outside to do some outdoor scenes. So the next thing is he moves his operation, his filming operation, up to Fort Lee, New Jersey, where the George Washington Bridge comes in on this side. That's Fort Lee, New Jersey. So he went there because he was going to make movies. Now, if you were going to make movies, where would you get movie stars from? Maybe from Broadway?
New York, yeah.
Yeah, so it was easier to get people from Broadway to Fort Lee than it was Broadway to bring them out to West Orange, which was quite a trip. So he brought them in there. And they would start acting and whatever, and they were making films. Well, when the world heard that Thomas Edison, this the big inventor, was now in Fort Lee making movies, 27 filming companies opened up in Fort Lee, New Jersey. And they were all making films and all that. Well, they're all gone today, with the exception of one, Universal Studios, down in Florida. Right? There you go. So they're all gone after all of that. Anyway, so he kept working on these, and he kept improving it. And motion pictures, so nobody had ever seen motion pictures, so he went out there with his camera. He went to a boxing match, he went to a baseball game, he went to ballerina, and then he opened up a place in New York City on a street level, and open up the doors, and you go inside, and they had these machines, and you would put coins in, and you'd have to look in the viewfinder, like this, and there were people lined up around the block because they had never seen motion pictures. They all wanted to see them. So, if you lost your place or you ran out of change, you were done. That was it. Next. And so people were putting that money in there, and that's where he coined pay-per-view. Pay-per-view.
Pay-per-view.
And so anyway, so they were doing this, they were watching these movies until some lady said, but Mr. Edison, why do we have to look in this machine? Couldn't you make this so that we could all see it together on the wall up somewhere? Well, he didn't think that was so important, but he found out there were two men working on this idea in France, the Lumiere brothers, and they invented a projection system for his film. Well, the problem was that he bought the patent from them, by the way, gets it back to New Jersey, opens it up, and finally you're only able to project this thing 2 feet. This is not much of a projector. Well, what the real problem was is in the back was this little tiny ball well, that wasn't bright enough, but here's a guy that knew all about bulbs, right? So he replaced the bulb with a real bright bulb with a mirror behind it, and now he was able to project a movie 40 feet away. So he takes his contraption, he goes to New York City, right on where Macy's is today, on 34th Street. There was an old vaudeville theater, and he went in there and said, everybody knew his face, everybody knew Thomas Edison. He says, "Could I try a new invention here in your theater?" "Sure, Mr. Edison." So he set it up, he set his projector up between two aisles. They closed the curtains and they hung a bed sheet. And they turned it on and projected it up 40 feet. And that was the invention of the motion picture theater, just the way we know it today, with the soft chairs and the big screen. And it was the month after that that he invented popcorn. Nah, I'm only kidding. Yeah, somebody said that's where he made all his money, at $7.50 a tub. So there you go. There's so much more I could tell you. There's one last story, I guess. I'll tell you this part. There was a mine up in Ogdensburg, New Jersey, and it was an iron mine, and they asked him if he could help to figure out how to separate the iron from the sand and gravel. And he said, "Sure." And he came up with this idea. Here's a container with yellow sand and iron filings. And he took a magnet and was able to separate the iron from it. You see it? Like that? So what happened was they actually, up in Ogdensburg, they used to crush all this stone down to a fine powder, and it would come down the conveyor belt, and they would go like that, try to pick out the iron. Very difficult, very difficult. So Edison came up with the idea. He built this physical thing up there in Ogdensburg, but this is what he put on the patent application. And they would pour this granulated sand and mix up top, and he put a big magnet on the side, and when the stuff went through, anything that was magnetic would get pulled over by the magnet and would fill up a bucket. Anything that wasn't magnetic would go straight down, doing the same thing as what this thing does. Separating, the iron is separated. Okay? So there you go. That's how he got into the mining business, thinking, boy, that was easy. And so what he didn't realize is that the business was very difficult, very competitive. Here's a piece of natural iron. You can feel this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Iron ore out of the ground. Or feel it? Yeah. That's its natural state.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when he was doing this, he was working real hard to produce this iron, and then all of a sudden they found that there was a vein of iron in Minnesota that was so pure. It was called the Mesabi Range. It was so pure that they were taking the iron out of the ground. They could build cars with it immediately. It wasn't powder like this. So he knew that he had to close it up, and that was the end of that. So he closed up his iron mine, losing $4 million in those days' money. And finally, 3 or 4 years later, he got an idea. He said, all that sand and gravel that they've been grinding up for years, piles and piles and piles of it. He got another idea, opened up another company. He called it the Edison Portland Cement Company. And he started to mix that piles of sand with concrete, mixed Portland cement, and they put it into 80-pound bags, just the way you could buy one today, in an 80-pound bag. And he got his very first contract to sell his concrete. He sold 150,000 bags, and they built Yankee Stadium.
And he made more than
And he got,
$4 million.
he didn't get it quite on that one, but his second big contract, they built the Panama Canal.
Oh, okay.
He did okay.
I wonder how many billions he made.
Was he the first one to put the sand and the cement in a bag?
I don't know that for a
He may not have
fact,
invented it, but he knew he
but he
got all
knew that
sand.
was the way to do it. I think he picked the 80-pound bag because it was convenient, but that's the way they still sell them. They sell them 80s and 40s.
Right.
Yeah. And by the way, this tower that you see outside was made mainly of concrete, and it was mainly done that way because of his involvement in concrete. This is a photograph from when they did the renovation of it over the past 2 years. It was renovated, and the concrete was going to pop because of the water leakage behind it and so forth. But before I go, the last part of this thing is about the tower itself. The tower itself there's a light bulb on the top of this. There's a photograph here of a man standing next to the light bulb. The tower is about 100, I forgot the real number, 160 feet. But this light bulb was made by Corning Glass. They made it because inside, on the top of the tower, they put Edison's bulbs, which would light up every night. But the heat from the bulbs, they were afraid that when it rained or ice or snow, that would crack the glass. And so Corning Glass volunteered to make the shell. They did this in 1937, and it was really to advertise their brand new product called Pyrex. So Pyrex, you could heat it and cold, and there it was. Hey, if it's okay for Edison, it's got to be okay. Yep.
And now they're more
And so
popular and known
so now
by
everybody-
their Gorilla Glass, which are all over our phones.
Yeah, the Gorilla
The
Glass
Gorilla
made by
Glass
Corning?
by Corning.
Was that Corning? I didn't know that. Okay.
Gorilla
I didn't know.
Glass.
Gorilla Glass, yeah. Yeah, you can hammer it and it doesn't break. Yeah. Amazing, huh?
What's the deal with the sock?
What's that?
Sock over here.
The sock.
Oh, that's, yeah, that's not
Oh, that was the.
Yeah, that's
volume
the story on that one is, let me tell you, Edison was very hard of hearing. You guys missed this part. He was very hard of hearing. He had no hearing in this ear, and he was down to 30% in this ear when he died. And here's a guy that invents the phonograph, right? Well, his hearing was so bad that when he was working on this, he couldn't really hear it very well. And so he would bite it, and so he could feel the vibrations go up his bones. And he was in a room filled with all these other men, and he was a perfectionist, you know, he had this thing playing, and he was tweaking it and tightening and doing this and that. And it was driving everybody nuts, playing it over and over and over, until one of his men said to him, "Mr. Edison, please, put a sock in it." That's what that expression means. Put a sock in it.
Oh.
They couldn't stand the noise anymore. Put a sock in it. There you go. All right.
All the men that worked for him.
Yes.
How did he know that they wouldn't leave him and take his idea before the patent?
He didn't know that. He didn't know that at all, but they were very dedicated to him. Some of the men that started with him ended with him.
Okay.
They put up they called themselves the Edison Pioneers. They all contributed, and they put up the first tower outside, which was like a radio tower, you know, with the steel bars, and that came down in the storm. But they contributed to that, so they really loved him. I mean, he was a tough guy to work for. Let me tell you, his house was down our street, just to the left, and that's where him and his family lived. And not across the street directly, but down just a little bit, there was a boarding house. There's a photograph over there, the Sarah Jordan boarding house. Now she would put the men up, the single men. She had this nice sized house. There were 3 or 4 bedrooms. She had 3 or 4 beds. And when they first started, there were 7 men here working with him. And as they grew, it grew up as far as 80 men working in that. Well, that house got overfilled, and she had 5 men to the bed. I wouldn't want to stay in that bedroom, but 5 men to the bed. Anyway, I forgot why I was telling you the story. What was the question?
Dedication.
Oh, dedication. So anyway, he would go home at night, and he'd walk down the hill and go to his house. But if he thought of something in the middle of the night, he'd walk up there, he'd knock on the everybody back to work. That's the dedication. And they'd come back to work, and they would work until they figured out what's. And they loved him so much, and he would drive them, and they would laugh, and they would have coffee and stuff in the back of the laboratory. They even had this photograph over there. There was a guy that played the organ. He had an organ back, so he would sing along. And he tried to make them as happy as possible. There's a pond in the middle of this 36-acre property, and he used to, on real hot days, he would take the men down there to kill some time. They'd go fishing in the lake, and so he tried to treat them the best that he could. Across the street is where the electric train, where he put the electric train. Well, when they built the electric train, they were trying to make it go faster and faster, and the guys were on that thing. He'd make it go so fast. That guys were falling off, and they were having fun. He was trying to keep it light and lively. But most of them, every time when they worked really hard at something, he would put their name on the patent. in addition to his. So they would get some sort of royalties, and that's what I guess pulled them all together.
Okay.
So many people had their names on these packets. He was always number one, but a lot of people. When he knew you were working hard, that's how he paid you. I would like to take you outside to the tower. Would you like to see it?
Yeah.
It's not a great deal to see, but it's worth seeing since you're here. Let me go get the key for the tower.
Okay, right off the back door.
You ladies did